Good morning. This is Shindo. I'm going to be reading from an article from Al Jazeera, which, when it comes to the Middle East, Al Jazeera normally has pretty good articles. Before I read this article, I'm going to just go ahead and give you my opinion of what's going to happen and why when it comes to Syria. Trump has really put himself into a corner with this, because if he backs out, he's going to be no better than, Obama, who said, this is a line, don't cross it, when it came to Syria, and Russia and Syria crossed that line, and then Obama, in his typical manner, did nothing. So Trump, who's coming out and saying that something is going to be done in Syria, I assure you something will be done. This is one of many dangerous areas in which this country and this world is moving into, and it's inevitable. It's inevitable, regardless of who was president, that we're going to be looking at a looming world war. I don't believe we will actually go into a world war. I believe it will be stopped. And I believe, as I have said many times before, that the great white knight, Donald Trump, is going to be the one who eventually brings this peace. He's going to have to bring it through strength. He'll have to do it through strength. So what we're going to see, I believe, is that Trump is going to actually do something militarily in Syria, which is going to put the world to the brink of war, because Russia and China have said for years now, I have been following Syria since this war started, because the war started in Syria about the same time that I came to a realization of what exactly is going on in this world, and that this age is indeed ending. So I have been following this since just about when the war started. And I'll tell you that for some time, China and Russia have said if the United States attacks Syria, it will be World War III. Now, do I believe that China and Russia are going to actually do something, cause a World War III? No, I don't. Everybody wants to sort of look like the big man, the tough country. Now that China is here, I imagine the president of China is here in the United States and speaking with Trump. I can see Trump saying something that China's not going to like, a number of things that China's not going to like. So, my prediction, Trump wants to put all this Russia nonsense, and it is nonsense, I'm really tired of hearing about it, behind him. And what better way of doing that than looking tough on Russia? And it will be behind him, because what's looming in the future, in the very near future, is a lot worse than any possible links that the Trump campaign had with Russia, which I believe, personally, is ridiculous. I think it's a red herring. I don't think it has anything to do with anything, personally. But that's my opinion, and this is my channel, so that's what I do. I express my opinion. I also cover the real news here. The real news that affects you, right? because whether or not Trump had some Russian influence, they're never going to prove it. It's just going to drag on and drag on and drag on, and I can assure you it's not going to affect you personally. But whether or not Trump gets us at the brink of World War III, that's going to affect you. It's going to affect everybody. So, I do the real news here. If you like what I do, please subscribe, comment, like my videos, and share my videos. This is Al Jazeera. You will find a link to this in the description box. U.S. warns of unilateral Syria moves if UN fails to act. Suspected chemical attack in Idlib province that killed 86 becomes subject of diplomatic standoff at Security Council. The United States has warned it could take unilateral action if the United Nations fails to respond to a suspected chemical attack on rebel-held town in Syria that killed more than 80 people, including many children. Quote, when the United Nations constantly fails in its duty to act collectively, there are times in the life of states that we are compelled to take our own action, unquote. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, said on Wednesday. The warning came during an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council called by France and Britain after an early morning attack on Tuesday in the Khan Shakouhan in Idlib province. Britain, France, and the U.S. presented a draft resolution demanding a full investigation of the attack, which they blamed on the Syrian government. But talks ended without a vote after Russia, an ally of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, said the text was, quote, categorically unacceptable, unquote. Syria has denied the allegations, while Russia has blamed the rebels, saying the deaths occurred when a government shell hit a rebel chemical weapons depot. Horrific acts. Haley lashed out at Moscow for failing to rein in Damascus, saying in the council chamber to hold up a photograph of victims, one showing a child laying lifeless, a mask covering his face. Quote, how many more children have to die before Russia cares, unquote, she asked. Quote, if Russia has the influence in Syria that it claims to have, we need to see them use it, she said. We need to see them put an end to these horrific acts, unquote. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights Monitoring Group said at least 86 people, including 30 children, were killed in the raid on Khan Shakouhan. Dozens more were left gasping for air, convulsing and foaming at the mouth, doctors said. If confirmed, it would be the worst chemical weapon attack in Syria since 2013, when sarin gas was used on a rebel-held area of Damascus. Quote, if we are not prepared to act, then the Council will keep meeting, month after month, to express outrage at the continuing use of chemical weapons, and it will not end, unquote, Haley said. Quote, we will see more conflict in Syria. We will see more pictures that we can never unsee, unquote. The draft resolution backs a probe by the Organization of Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, and demands that Syria cooperate to provide information on its military operations on the day of the assault. Russian Deputy Ambassador Vladimir Sarkanov told the Council the proposed measure was hastily prepared and unnecessary, but voiced support for an investigation. Quote, the main task now is to have an objective inquiry into what happened, unquote, he said. The negotiations continued on the proposed resolution throughout most of Wednesday. Diplomats said it could come up for a vote at the Council as early as Thursday. Many lines crossed. In a press conference at the White House later in the day, U.S. President Donald Trump said the chemical attack has crossed many lines, and has abruptly changed his thinking about Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Only days earlier, multiple members of Trump's administration had said Assad ouster was no longer a U.S. priority, drawing outrage from Assad critics in the United States and abroad, but Trump said Tuesday's attack, quote, had a big impact on me. Big impact, unquote. An aside here, this is me, not the article. This probably has a big reason why he got rid of Bannon, this guy who's the conspiracy type. You know, if you don't know, a lot of the Alex Jones conspiracy type crowd, they don't believe that Assad and Syria are the bad guys. They also don't seem to believe that Russia are the bad guys, folks. There are no good guys or bad guys. That is the movies. Okay? This is reality. Okay? There are people who do good things. There are people who do bad things. And sometimes they're the same people. This is a very complicated mess over in Syria. But I think that this is one of the big reasons why Bannon is no longer part of Trump's Security Council. Quote, my attitude towards Syria and Assad has changed very much, unquote, he said, but refused to telegraph any potential U.S. military retaliation. Since the attack, Trump has been under increased pressure to explain whether it was egregious enough to force a U.S. response. Robert Ford, former U.S. ambassador to Syria, expressed skepticism that Trump would resort to military action. Quote, as a presidential candidate, he could not have been more clear that he wanted to avoid military involvement in the Syrian civil war, unquote, he told Al Jazeera. Quote, for him to order military strikes, even limited military strikes, in response to chemical attacks in Idlib would be a gigantic change and not one that I'm at all sure that the administration is actually going to do, unquote. Well, my opinion on this is that it depends on just how much he's pushed into a corner when it comes to Russia and everything else. I don't think Trump would hesitate to use military action. Damn the consequences. Ford says all fingers point to a Syrian government as a culprit of the attack. Quote, I find it laughable that government such as Russia would suggest that rebels have a chemical weapon capacity, but they also seem to use it on their own people and never on the Syrian army, unquote, he added. Trump's first reaction to the attack was to blame former President Barack Obama's, quote, weakness in earlier years for enabling Assad. Obama had put Assad on notice that using chemical weapons would cross a, quote, red line, necessitating a U.S. response, but then failed to follow through, pulling back from planned airstrikes on Assad's forces after Congress would not vote to approve them. Trump and other critics have cited that the key moment that U.S. lost most global credibility. Quote, I now have responsibility, Trump said. That responsibility could be made a lot easier if it was handled years ago, unquote. Joshua Landis, director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma, told Al Jazeera that U.S. would likely warn Moscow if it was to resort to using military might in Syria. Quote, they have to disambiguate that they have to make sure that they don't hurt any Russian soldiers, unquote, he said. But there is a wide palette of things that they can do. They can bomb airports and destroy the runways so that Syrian planes can fly for some time. That Syrian planes can't fly for some time. They could kill a bunch of Syrian soldiers. They could destroy command centers. We'll have to wait and see, unquote. But Landis said it was unlikely that Trump would push for an all-out regime change in Syria. Trump's entire policy for the Middle East has been based on reversing the notion of regime change. He supports strongmen, unquote, he said. Quote, now that he's got a strongman in Assad who's violating human rights and this norm of not using chemical weapons, he has to calibrate his policy and try to insist on human rights even as he supports dictators, unquote. Well, that's pretty much been the course of action supporting dictators all over the world. The United States has, as long as they keep everything in line in that region and don't, disrupt the flow of oil. So, I mean, that has been the American policy up into George W. Bush going into Iraq for no good reason except trumped up bullshit. Anyway, there's the article, folks. If you like what I do, please subscribe to my channel, click like, share, comment on my videos. This is Shindo. Have a good Thursday.